Today we're going to talk about race in America. And today I will just ask the questions to Rod. Rod, you're American, I'm English, so you, I suppose, should know a little more than I do, and I'd like to learn about what it's all about. So, yeah, my first question is, what does racial inequality look like in America today?
Well, I would say today we can see there are clearly large disparities in certain areas, such as wealth, um, educational outcomes, health outcomes, and when I say disparity, I mean specifically that for the African American, those outcomes are usually worse than for white people. So that's one way, I suppose, you could look, is just see what the outcomes are. Now, the cause of those outcomes could be, multifaceted, of course, and I think we're looking at a very complicated picture. Racism is one factor. I mean, historically, it's certainly been a factor.
Yeah.
But now, I think it's racism combined with a lot of other things as well. That is, it creates.
Such as?
Well, for example, in the early days of when we first tried affirmative action in this country, like the first wave of them, who are people like Clarence Thomas was one of these people, okay, who's on the Supreme Court. He's a Supreme Court justice, and so in those days, in those early days, they basically would take a certain number of black applicants and then just put them into Harvard, right? And but what happened was it was a very traumatizing experience for that first wave, because they were in a white space that they had never been in before, and it was a culture shock that they weren't prepared for. That they didn't have the, like Thomas, like I think Thomas Sowell would call it, like they didn't have like the social capital, as he would call it, right? To survive in that space. Okay? So then the question becomes, well, I mean, how do you create an opportunity playing field that's level, where the space is shared, from the get-go, So, I mean, I think we're definitely closer to that now than we were in those early days. But yeah, but to answer your question, I think that, to me, that's probably the best indication, is just that the disparities are quite overwhelming, and they're pretty obvious. I agree with people who say that there's more than one reason for those disparities, but I do believe that there's a racist component to it. Yes.
And so, how does that play out? How does the racist component play out in government or policy making or institutions?
Well, I think we're actually entering kind of a new era, in a way. There's certainly a larger inclusion now, right? Like I think it's just taking a couple generations to. Like, one thing I think that has really changed everything is the internet, right? Like, everybody has access now to everybody's information, right? So, we're all kind of on. I think that has been a great leveler, social media, it's et cetera. So it's we're more inclusive, but where I still think there is a kind of white bent on our system is that I mean, there's no question who's going to be in the driver's seat, right? Like, at the end of the day, at this point in human history, you know, descendants of Europeans and Europeans dominate the entire world, you know, essentially culturally, commercially. Um, and that's where I think we're still living in a society or a world that is racist because um, all of the institutions are run by white people that are, you know, that have real impact in the world, right? That are global, that have real weight and meat, right?
Mm.
And the militaries, right? I mean, China's catching up now with the military. You know, they're so I mean, China's a new, you know, another factor now that wasn't there before too, right? So you know, things are changing, um, but I still think there's a central idea that, you know, white people are in charge of the world. You know,
They're in charge, making the decision. So
the rightful
maybe
rulers
not,
of the world.
yeah,
Yeah.
and maybe not even that they're necessarily racist. It's just that they're in charge, and so they're going to be making decisions in the interests of white people, of their own people.
Yeah.
Or yeah, or do you think
Yeah. I would
actually
say
it
so.
is? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to. I don't want to be too nebulous, you know. But when you just look at the makeup of the world, you know, all the rich countries are white, dominated, European or descendants of Europeans are in charge of them,
Yeah.
and all the global institutions are dominated by white people too, like the United
Mm.
Nations and the IMF
Yeah.
and the World Bank and all this, right? So, and we have the military of, you know, like the militaries are, you know, the nuclear weapons. I mean, so we have a lot of capital, you know, all
Yeah.
the land is ours in this country, right? So anybody who's born into this world, right? If you're born white, you're just born into a much higher level of inherited
Mm.
wealth, I suppose.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay. Well, what are the potential ways forward for a less racist future?
Well, it's, you know, it's a combination of things in my view,
Mm.
um, that incorporates actually ideas that would be considered both from the right and the left.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like I think, you know, I've listened to a number of black conservatives on these topics, and they really trumpet personal responsibility
Mm-hmm.
and black excellence. You know, they point to all the great, you know, black people throughout American history who, you know, who've been outstanding in all different fields, right? And you know, to encourage young black people to, you know, aspire to such vocations of science and mathematics
Mm-hmm.
and the arts and everything, right? So so that's what they stress, and I think that's really good too. You know, I don't think you want to do that to the exclusion, though, of, you know, having to look at a more collective. Um, I mean, look at it through a more collective lens. You know, where, you know, I do believe that there should be national policies, such as reparations, for
Mm-hmm.
example. So that would be one way forward. You know, but also, if we're going to stay together and not divorce, which some people on the far left are advocating for, right? Like, you know, black people who on the very far, like, white people are never going to change.
Mm.
Okay, and who can blame them, right? That that perspective, to me, makes a lot of sense, frankly. But if we are going to stay together, then we do have to have some kind of personal responsibility, right? I mean, then it has to be about each person taking care of themselves, and to a large degree, right? I mean, but also having a level opportunity playing field, right? Where especially educational opportunities have to start very early in life, right? very, very early. So
Okay, so personal responsibility, but also admitting that there is systemic racism and that has to be changed as
yeah,
well.
and
A mixture of both.
understanding that what we've done historically has in this country from from slavery through all the Jim Crow laws, through all of the other forms of racism and discrimination that Black people have faced. You know, yeah, I'm sorry, Jerry. I kind of lost my train of thought on this.
That's all right.
What was that question?
You talked about reparations.
Okay.
That would be a sum of money to every Black person in America. Would it be like that, or
Yeah,
how
well,
would it
there's
work?
many forms, right? You know, there are many forms it could take. I think that a cash payment should be like, you know, part of any package that we would come to. Because, you know, this is the thing, you know, we have to remember that because there was so much time in which, you know, so much was like actually stolen, right, from our own standards today, right? Like how much of their labor was stolen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then later on, we made all these laws making it very hard to own land, you know, even though they were supposed to get, you know, 40 acres and a mule after the Civil War, right? But, which would have, I mean, who knows what the eventual outcome of that would have been, but I bet that the disparity would be less now, right? Just to have that seed to grow, you know, all these generations later, I think it would have grown into something quite big, because that's how human beings operate, right? I mean, that's just what happens. So, but they were denied so much, and so yeah, I think the way has to be cleared in a sense, right? And so yeah, I do think some forms of action, you know, are appropriate. You know, I'm not sure what those actions, you know, necessarily what they should be or would be. But
did you know that the British government has just recently finished off paying reparations
to who?
The slave owners, of course, not to the slaves, to the slave owners. Enormous sums of money we paid.
Oh, wow.
And as I say, we've only just finished paying off the loan. I think about 20 years ago or something like that.
I mean, think about that level of injustice, right? Like,
yeah,
reparations goes to the perpetrators, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, see, this is what I'm talking about. Like, this is how entrenched it is. But I do think it's starting to bust open. You know, I mean, more and more people are starting to see through the whole thing, right? And are starting to see, you know, that the white power mystique is really coming to an end, right? I mean,
yeah.
You
know. But I'm always intrigued by the word systemic. It's a word used a lot, isn't it?
Yes.
Is it? How do we change that? Is it about putting people of color into the higher positions of these institutions? Is that enough to change it? I mean, how do we change structural and systemic in police and education and government and all these things?
Well, I mean, you know, again, I'd say the first question is, are we going to move forward together and decide, you know, we're going to live up to the ideals of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence, right? As, you know, we're all going to pursue happiness, you know, as equals. I'm more in favor of solutions that are more on the equality of opportunity side more than equality of outcome, right?
Yeah.
If we're going to stay in the capitalistic system. Like I do think it is appropriate to use government funds to make reparations to the descendants of slaves in this country. As a national policy that is voted on by the Congress, I think that's perfectly okay to do, in my opinion.
Yep.
As a way for the government to really acknowledge, right? I mean, that's what's necessary, right? I mean, there's more to it than just money, right? It's actually it's like an energetic thing, or like an emotional thing, right? Where it would be a gesture of you are, valued members of this country, right? Like,
yeah,
because I don't think that's how Black people are, feel from the way our government has been run thus far,
yeah,
all the way until now, frankly, right? In many ways.
yeah. I think an admission and an apology is important, yeah, to move forward.
And to just embrace, right? It would be because it's not about, I hear objections from white people occasionally, like, well, my ancestors weren't, the slave owner, so why should I? But it isn't about taking money from you and giving it, it's a national policy of everybody, including their tax dollars too, are going to go into it. So it's a national thing where everybody is paying into it, including the recipients. You see, through their taxes. So, I don't see it. So it's more of a government to its citizens kind of thing than it is from a white person to a Black person kind of thing.
Yeah. Okay.
That's the way I think about that. Yeah.
Sure. All right. Well, let's move on to another question. Do you believe that white people are inherently racist?
Yes. Not like biologically, but no, I don't think, I think racial chauvinism, even though it's actually kind of a new thing of skin color, right? Only a couple centuries, right? Based on skin color. But the idea that you're part of a superior tribe or a superior race or a superior nation or whatever, excuse me, is very commonplace, right? I mean, you see it everywhere you look in the world. The problem begins with the colonialization. Right? I mean, that's when the conflict starts, is when you start to expand. Right? And so, yes, if you live in a country where, white Europe, the descendants of Europeans of Western Europeans, right, are in charge of it, then yeah, I think you are born and bred to believe that you are the rightful ruler of the earth. Like we are the spearhead. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And the media, of course, is racist, aren't they? They portray Black people as the people doing the wrong things, as muggers or breaking the law. And so it does slowly, daily, you get that drip of racism, don't you, as a white person?
Yes. But even if, I mean, my childhood experience, I had two very early, different experiences as a young child. So the very first neighborhood I was born into was very diverse and mixed. And, there was a Black family across the street. There was an Asian family. There was an Orthodox Jewish family. All, and we all played together. We were all in each other's houses, and our parents babysat each other. And it was like so that was like my very first encounter with just other kids, right? So this is before any idea of, racism had ever been born in my mind. A few years later, though, we moved to a much more white town. And there I did hear a lot more, racist, commentary and jokes. And I participated in it too, to fit in sometimes, right? So yeah, I do think it's just there. we can try to deny it, but yeah, I do think this is and a lot of it, in my view, is not even malicious, right? It's just purely unconscious, right?
It's unconscious, yeah.
It's just purely like you don't even know it. This is why people are in denial, right? Because they don't see how really deeply ingrained into their conditioning it really is.
Yeah, there was a black activist in England on a show, and he said in London a lot of the crime is committed high proportionally by black people, and people say it's a black problem.
Right.
But then if you look at Glasgow, 95% of the crime is committed by white people, and what do they say? Oh, well, it's a poverty problem.
It's a class problem. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so no one was, oh well, look at the whites. So yeah, that is a good example of it.
Yeah. So I think white people really. I mean, so going back a few minutes to what can we do to go forward. I mean, I do think for America to become an unracist country, right? They like to actually become non-racist. I mean, it will require a period of time in which white people are not comfortable.
Are uncomfortable.
Yeah, I mean, are going to. Yes, I mean, it's just necessary that process would have to happen, and to really, for white people to really see the full depth and scope and scale of the disruption and destruction that we've wreaked on the earth.
And I suppose uncomfortable in admitting that exactly. We are racist.
Right. I'm not talking about being guilty or something like that, or we're getting into this whole, but it is necessary for white people to really come to terms with the fact that our colonialization of the earth was not beneficial to anybody else except us. Mm-hmm. Historically. I mean, now we are more inclusive now. That's good. Okay. That I'm not saying that's not a good thing. If we're going to stay together, then we should keep expanding the inclusion thing for sure. Right. And becoming really, truly fair, so, but that would require, white people really changing their mindset about, what their true history has been.
Yeah.
And there's good to it too. I'm not saying it's all been bad. I mean, there has been glory, right? There have been great scientific discoveries, right? There have been great works of art, right? So it's not all for naught, but that's coming from a white person's perspective, I mean, if you're not white and you were always excluded from all that, it might actually look like it was all for naught, right? And so, this is another thing that has to be reconciled. There's two very distinct views, right? Like people who are not white can see, it can see white people in a way that we can't see ourselves very, very easily and clearly, right? Things that are almost impossible for us to see unless we choose to go through the process of learning, right? But now, I mean, I don't know if you know what's going on, like Florida, right? With the governor Rick DeSantis, right? He's trying to make laws for schools where any content that makes white people feel uncomfortable at all is banned. So, well, that's what he's like trying to do. It hasn't passed.
This is the critical race.
Republicans are not on board with his with his thinking, by the way, too. But
is that critical race theory?
Yeah, he's part of the fight against that, right? The critical race theory.
And how would you define critical race theory?
Well, it depends. Are we using it in how it's being used now, or how it was used 2 years ago before it?
It's changed.
Oh yeah, I mean those are different words now, right?
Well, both. What did it originally mean 2 years ago?
Well, it was a legal theory that critically examined American laws and policies throughout history and in the present day to look at how they led to racial discrimination in some way.
Mm.
Okay. It's a very useful, illuminating strategy, and it's worked for many. It's been a successful strategy. So it's it's a brilliant legal strategy and lens, right, for law. Fast forward to more recent studies in education. If you're getting a master's degree in education these days, to become a teacher, these teacher training programs are now informed by that lens, right, of critical race theory. And so when I went to get my master's degree to become a teacher here in the US, we studied critical race theory as a legal thing, right?
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah.
You had to, yeah.
Although, yeah. I mean, I'm not saying I read all these long books about it, but we did have an introduction to it. I think I had a pretty good understanding of what it was. I hope I do. I could be wrong about it. And again, I thought it was a good lens. But the conflict is now that we're using that lens to rewrite history, right? And that's like threatening a lot of people whose understanding of history is quite different, right? So there's two different. Again, there's just two different views between white people. It's very hard for them to see some things that that people who aren't white see very easily and very clearly. So how do you get more white people to see what we're talking about more? I don't know. I don't know.
Having conversations like this, maybe.
Yeah, I think this is a start. But in terms of badgering people, it doesn't work, right? Shaming people seems to create the opposite effect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So
don't give them statistics either. I've heard that doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I mean, you got to remember logic and statistics. These have always been tools of the oppressor. That's what that's what they say. When Black people would make legitimate grievances about their conditions and the treatment at the hands of white people throughout American history, they've heard responses about logic, like statistics, right, are not. They'll have another statistic that'll prove that what they're talking about, the problem doesn't exist, right? So something like that. And so that is being challenged now too by more and more people. And so I think it's getting harder and harder. Like, I think white people are frankly are getting more boxed into. They can't really excuse or justify, or hold back, the truth,
Yeah, but I've heard a lot of poorer white people have a problem with that term privilege because they feel, well, I'm not privileged. I'm having a pretty rough time. I can't get a job and I live in poverty. Do you think is that the right word to use?
Well, as a matter of fact, yes. I mean, and the reason why is because rather than comparing rich to poor privileged statuses, compare a poor Black person to a poor white person's life, right? And see if indeed the white person had an easier time, in the world as a poor.
I mean, they're not going to get arrested on the street for the color of their skin. That's a start, isn't it?
Probably not.
Yeah.
Not for
Well, definitely, I think.
right. Not for the color. Well, again, whiteness, right, is it has been the equivalent of normalcy for white people. This was certainly true in my generation of growing up. You know, we thought we were just normal, right? The baby boomers had us, and we were the children of the baby boomers, and
Mm.
we thought we were just normal, right? There was no question as to who Americans were. You know, we were just normal Americans. You know, so it makes it hard to see. You know, it makes it hard to see some of the things we're talking about because you think you're normal and you're comparing everything to what you think that is, right? So
Mm-hmm.
everything's on a hierarchy of what my norm is, and then everything is, is being matched up to that.
Yeah. Well, look, we've got a couple of minutes left, so I'll just give you one more question, Rod. What would racial justice look like in America?
God. Well,
tough one to finish.
I think there just has to be there has to be a really honest conversation, right? Like a very open, frank, with expectations we all agree on. You know, like what can we expect? You know, for what's the best outcome we can aim for? You know, in my opinion, I think Martin Luther King got it right with his notion of color blindness, which doesn't mean you don't see color. You see the person's skin color, but the skin color doesn't matter at all. It's only as important as the color of your hair or the color of your eyes, right? Like it just doesn't matter. It signifies nothing. Okay, so that to me would be the best way. And of course, in America, this has been happening since the beginning, and it's still happening. You know, there's been an intermingling, right? So the American is actually changing, right? I mean, what is becoming the American is really starting to look quite darker. You know?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, I think you are the first country maybe to go. The majority will be non-white, I think. Yeah.
Yeah,
of all the Australias or Canadas or colonial countries.
Well,
anyway, that's a nice way to finish, Rod. Color blindness, I like it. Mm-hmm. That's what we're aiming for. And
that's right. But I know some people don't agree with that. You know, they think that's not the right way.
Yeah,
they think color blindness is a cop out. So I just wanted to say there is one caveat to that.
Yeah.
That in the meantime, like between now and that goal, there is a process that, there is a period of time that white people have to really come to terms with their racism and how implicit and complicit they actually are for any of this to change at all, right? So that has to actually happen. It isn't like, oh, okay, now your color of skin doesn't matter. You can't just jump there. That's like spiritual bypassing, right? You need to go through a process to get there.
Mm-hmm.
And it's maybe an emotionally painful one.
Sure. Okay, Rob.
Good. So
we'll finish it up there.